All right, everybody, welcome back. We've got another Rebooting the Blue, Claire and Chris here. Chris Humphreys, who's now LPC NCC, so getting all those letters. We are talking about suicide today. So, just first off, a disclaimer: it's a big topic, and if you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, struggling, needing help in crisis, there are resources listed in the description. Also, you can always call 988, which is the Crisis Hotline. If you're a veteran, you can press 1 and you'll get a veteran-focused crisis line support. And then for law enforcement, there's COPLine, 1-800-COPLine. And then we've also listed some other resources in the description, those as well as there's some youth specific lines, there's some text lines. So lots of resources out there for you. If you're experiencing suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, please reach out for help. So, Chris, anything to add to our if you need help?
No, I think you covered them all. As a therapist that works with first responders, yeah, COPLine, is a good one. I've had a couple references from them. It supports what you would call rescues. And then again, there's others that are other first responder specific. And we can even put that in the reference stuff that you're talking about. Fire dispatch, yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, great. Glad to hear that there are lots of resources out there. So first, let's talk about why is this relevant to first responders, law enforcement, outside of the fact that you see it in your job all the time. Just so folks have kind of a sense of the scope and the reality of suicide within, we'll talk specifically law enforcement right now. So when we look at rates of suicide, the way that they calculate those is looking at if there was 100,000 in the population that we're looking at. So if we look at just the general US population overall, between 2016 and 2022, the rate of suicide in the general population per 100,000 was 13.87. When we look at law enforcement in general, the average rate was 21.4 per 100,000. So that's already, a big step up from the general population. But then when we look at the rate per 100,000 for agencies that employ 50 or fewer law enforcement officers, Work by Violante cites that there are 43.78 deaths by suicide per 100,000. And that doesn't even get into just suicidal ideation. Those are deaths by suicide, right? That are completed. So, this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem in law enforcement population that we're seeing this big spike, right? That tells us we need help. They need help.
Well, and oh man, we've covered some topics in a couple of years, right? In this rebooting the blue, this would definitely be one where I have a feeling people click on and then they'll click off, right? And not want to hear. There's a lot of stigma around this, but as Claire, as you're kind of talking, I'm sitting here going, man, my law enforcement career tracks that early '90s, into just a few years ago when I hung it up, still involved, as this therapist. And it's shocking actually to think of the ones that I know, right? Just even personally and professionally that I work with as a police officer. It is an issue that if anybody's been involved in law enforcement, you've probably been exposed to it. Hopefully not, but I'm pretty sure if you've done some time and made some travels, you'll know or have heard of a law enforcement officer that died by suicide. And it has changed, and this is why we need to have these conversations. And I'm glad that we're doing this, and kind of towards the end of this program that's been supporting your peer teams and your members, because we need to continue to have this conversation. Because I track with, that generation of officers that we were told. In fact, I remember being told in the academy. This is almost 30 years ago now, but being told in the little bit of, I think we got a 45-minute block on crisis communication, and it wasn't focused like a mental health crisis communication at all. We got none of that. but I remember the instructor saying, like, don't ask them directly if they're suicidal, right? Because, you know, if you do, and then they do kill themselves, it'll look like you put it in their head. Um, which, you know, even research back then showed that that's incorrect. We really, really know that's wrong now. And yet we still, in law enforcement circles, still struggle with asking the question, right, as we call it, right? Or even saying, you know, I'm struggling to the level where I think I'm thinking, you know, like, you know, take my own life. You know, I think it's so interesting that I spent years, well, hundreds of times, can't even count, right, of walking into people's homes, strangers, you know, a 911 call. And sadly, right, law enforcement is usually the tip of the mental health spear of somebody on crisis, you know, at 2 a.m, and walking into the home of strangers and being very, you know, informed and trained then at that time, and being able to ask them, you know, are you thinking of hurting yourself or someone else, right? And not even, and yet, even in my own precinct, even to be honest, you know, in my own patrol car with a partner, I could see them struggling so bad. And yet, man, I would never ask that question.
Mhm.
Never. Right.
Yeah.
So it's something we do need to talk about. The rates showing it, and again, just sort of to destigmatize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as you like described it there, right? It's asking, and there's a difference between, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because you could be thinking about hurting yourself and not be having necessarily suicidal ideation, right? Or are you thinking about dying by suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Being able to ask that question and know that you're not implanting the idea, but you're opening up a conversation that hopefully will help support someone to get some help. As I'm looking at like some of these stats between 2013 and 2022, we lost 39 law enforcement officers to suicide specifically by firearm. So that's not other types of suicide, right? There's lots of different ways, unfortunately,
That's
that
in Oregon.
die by suicide. Yeah, 39 Leos died by firearm suicide between 2013 and 2022. And
And
across
again,
the US,
yeah, and I won't even go through my Rolodex, but I'm sure I know. I think, you know, like I said, that's a. I mean, if you really look at that, that's a pretty prevalent number across the state.
yeah. Yeah.
So,
And then you think about like all of
mm,
the training, as it should, all the training and the resources that law enforcement have access to and should have access to keep themselves safe and alive on the job, keep others safe, so that they don't, you know, die in the line of duty. But we lose more law enforcement officers every year. It's tracked. We lose more law enforcement officers every year to suicide than we lose them to line of duty deaths. And thinking about like, what does that tell us? I mean, we really need to start both individuals and agencies from a systems perspective investing in protecting law enforcement mentally, physically and mentally. We do a great job physically, but what we've been working on for the past, you know, 5 years is trying to build that mental protection side as well.
yeah, and I think yeah, you used the word systems that it's as you know, it's going to be one of those sort of multi varied approaches, but a system that supports the ability to not only disclose but how to provide supports. And I'm going to say this as somebody that works right knee deep in this area, right? I mean, uh, most of your agencies, I've just been so impressed. Most of the agencies in Oregon that I work with, where this has become an issue, where somebody's been referred to me, or right, they are unbelievably supportive. Now, it is nuanced, right? There's a lot around the job that makes it really difficult for a person, you know, who's got a gun and a badge to say, you know, these thoughts are in my head versus, you know, somebody that has sort of a job where they're not doing what a police officer does, right? Yeah, just so logistically speaking, but this is why, you know, I say the front line on this is peer teams, really well-trained peer teams, right? The ability to that your people are trained not only to be brave enough, and that comes with having the skills, right, on how to ask the question. I don't track these numbers, but at one point I did sit down, and this is several years ago, and thought, like, okay, since I've been this LPC, this licensed therapist, how many acutely suicidal first responders, and I got to like 42. That was a number that sticks in my head. Now, again, I try not to track those sorts of things. And in all of those, right, it was other than several were like very clear, like, okay, I don't know why I'm here today, because last night I did this, right? Most of it is like euphemisms. I don't know what's going to go on, or it's getting really dark, or I guess that one disclosure type, which I've had a couple times, is pretty euphemistic. It was because it confused me. I've had that where it's like, Chris, I don't know why I'm here this morning, and of course, me being Chris, I'm like, oh, was a train late? That kind of a joke. No, like, Chris, I don't know why. The amount of pills that I had in my hand that I was staring at, 8 hours ago would indicate I shouldn't be here, right? So again, it's um, your peer teams, they need to be trained in that. Like I said, there's really two good trainings that are offered out there: the QPR, the question, persuade, refer. Assist, and I cannot remember what that acronym stands for. I apologize. That's one I think is really good. In fact, I think members of peer team, it should be required, and that's kind of a starting, right. That's that bottom metric. We don't want to lose any to suicide, right? I mean, if you're peer, because the minute you don't train on it, then you will find yourself in a peer session with somebody going, yeah, hey, I took all the pills and all the alcohol last night. I don't know what to hear, and you don't know what to do. Along with systems supporting the ability to disclose, and how does that work? What does it look like within your agencies, right? If you have somebody that's struggling with this, chaplaincies, I'll tell you, good, well-supported chaplain programs receive really, really effective in helping with that process. If you have officers that are struggling with intrusive and strong suicidal ideation, there can be a really amazing aspect when you have that spiritual support, because that's really what suicide is, right? It's hopelessness. We have no hope that this is going to get better, right? And for a warrior culture like those, that can get pretty embedded pretty deeply, right? And so, yeah, I mean, just like any suicide prevention model, it's really about how do we get that person to see that crack in the road, that there is hope, that this is that phrase, right? That suicide's a permanent solution to what is a temporary problem, right? How to see that view, that this is temporary, this too shall pass, right? And I'm telling you, the history of Chris Humphreys is definitely out there. I mean, I had some pretty dark moments in my career, and it does feel like, right? I mean, when you're in the middle of it, and you're dragging yourself in and climbing that patrol car day after day, and yet this investigation's going on over here, or this thing's going on over here, or who knows what's going on in your home life back here, right? It can seem like this is not going to end, right? And so that can be really a tough spot, because that's the other thing when we really talk about some of these models about suicide prevention, is when a person's in that sort of crisis state, or just kind of locked up, your view becomes very myopic. It's really this just right here, and then good peers, good therapists, good, well-trained people, right? Heart-led help you kind of pull back and hopefully see that wider view. And it can be weird, right, to ask a person this question: what keeps you? What keeps you, Claire? Claire says to Chris, this is what I'm trying to think of, it just be done. I think, Chris, it'd be better if I just don't wake up tomorrow. Chris asks Claire, hey, are you thinking of killing yourself? I mean, yeah, you may think, oh, a therapist, you don't ask that way. Sometimes that's how I ask it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
please. Oh, and Claire says, yeah, I'm thinking that might be the option. And then it seems counterintuitive, and it can be really, I'll try not to swear, but it can be really effing scary to then
Swear you
look at
want.
this person, maybe that maybe sits in the patrol car with you, that maybe your partner for 5 years, through thick and thin, the dark, the light, right? And to look at Claire and go, what keeps you from doing it? Right. And that's almost antithesis of that experience 30 years ago in the academy where they say, don't ask about it, right?
Hmm.
That's the antithesis because now I'm not only asking about it, but I'm saying, hey, Claire, what keeps you from doing it? Right? Why didn't you take all the pills and
Yeah.
wash it down with, you know, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because again, and it sounds, but it is, it's pulling that viewpoint back. Well, and I mean, I have had, and again, I know I threw the number 42, but it's many more, right? But I've had everything from, you know what? I I was looking at my dog sitting on the couch, pills here in one hand and my dog in the other. I'm thinking, who would take care? I don't have any plans. I got to wait till tomorrow because I got to call about my dog. Everything from pets to, of course, kids. I don't want to leave my kids in that situation, um, all the way to I've had it where um, I had one, hey, didn't want to do in this location because, and this was a first responder, not only, but it's like because I knew that the unit that would show up would be from right my and I so I just need a different spot,
Yeah.
right? But again, I got enough of a crack in the door, and I've not lost one yet, right? So all those conversations, I'm sort of kind of vaguely, they're not very specific, right? Um, but talking about, I mean, they allow for enough to have that conversation. Okay, so right, I mean, if you're still here for your dog, right? Which I'm a dog guy, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, then that's enough we can work with that this too shall pass in some way, right? Um, right. But that's where getting out there and accessing the training and agencies supporting the training, again, like the QPR. I mean, so they're asked the question, persuade you that, and then who do we refer you to?
Hmm.
Right? Assist will actually give your people some tools to actually how to sort of model their interventions. Again, QPR being a training that is a little shorter, and I know a lot of agencies like that because time is always tough
Yeah.
in getting training. But assist, like I said, is a good one. I'm not an assist trainer. I was a QPR trainer. I'm not an assist trainer. But man, I think that that's again another a good program. And I've actually had uh, or seen a couple law enforcement officers that are still here because they had a peer member that was trained in assist that actually did assist, and we call those rescues because that's what they are, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can actually, I'm a QPR trainer. So if any of our agencies in the McWhip need a QPR training, I can absolutely provide that. But I want to talk a little bit too about, because you've touched on so many important points. What I want to go back to is I think just helping people to understand maybe a little bit more about like why it can feel so difficult to talk about suicide. And one of the things that really stands out to me around that is just, at least in the US, historically, suicide has kind of been seen as like a moral failing, right? And just, I don't know, just understanding that, like, especially in first responders, especially in law enforcement, where there's this like death desensitization because you're constantly exposed to death, right? And then why might we see potentially, at least we're seeing more deaths by suicide in that population. Uh, there's not necessarily studies around like the frequency of suicidal ideation, right? Lots of people might have suicidal ideation and never die by suicide. So we can really only speak to the statistics of like higher suicide deaths, but you know, just thinking about potentially like more frequent or the higher frequency within that population of even having suicidal ideation, and why then, because maybe it's seen as a moral failing culturally, it just is so difficult to talk about. And that you mentioned that death before dishonor, right? So this kind of like weird balance of like moral failing, death desensitization, suicidal ideation. Suicide is almost like an escape hatch to this hopelessness, this like stress, overwhelm, those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's quite a lot of ingredients to that
I
stew
know.
there, right? But well, but you know, uh, I mean, law enforcement again, like I said, tip of the spear in a lot of things are usually, if someone dies by suicide, they're usually the first ones walking through the door. Especially you talk about, and I'd never heard that number about the smaller agencies and the rate, but I know, I work that side of the state with a lot of those agencies that are what you call mid to smaller. I mean, most of them, their deputies are also their death investigators. I think they have a different term back. My name was a death investigator, as we called it, but and yeah, so that exposure too, right? I mean, so when you ask that question, or when somebody finds themselves in a crisis situation, and if they've seen it, they can put themselves there mentally, right? Have you ever thought about, how you do it? Well, yeah, let me count the ways, right? Because they can go through their mental Rolodex pretty quickly. And then again, yeah, as I said, sort of that word culture. And I run up against sometimes other therapists. I think they get uncomfortable when they're doing their suicide prevention, like death, suicide is not a feasible option. And well, again, be careful with your warrior cultures, because it really is, the idea that right, I can, stand here and have my integrity questioned and stripped from me, by the newspapers or whatever, right? Or I can, stop it all now.
Mhm.
Well, understanding, right? It's actually not stopping it, maybe stopping it for you. Right. But again, um, that that is sometimes that thought process a very feasible option for them, in a way to maintain, or as a perception, right? They perceive that this would maintain at least my integrity. And that can be, again, seem very counterintuitive, but it's very real to them.
Oh yeah,
Very real. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, one of those reasons that is probably many reasons, right, for folks individually about why it might be challenging to admit to suicidal ideation or thinking about killing yourself, is that kind of cultural attachment of it being like seen as a moral failing culturally. And I think, just like helping people to understand that if you're experiencing suicidal ideation, you've not failed morally in some way,
Well,
right?
they'll say I'm weak, and why am I weak this way? And this is, again, as I say, is a lot of stuff that's going to sound contradictory, but that that piece of you that in this dark time is like, okay, I could check out, right? I could do this thing, no longer be here. Um, that you're struggling with admitting, because it is a dark time and the environment is such that it's making you feel hopeless. You know, it's actually not. It's not your weakness, right? In fact, and boy, oh boy, I may catch some heat for this. But over here, for that thing you do that we ask you to do, right? Meaning go towards danger, right? At the risk of your own life. In fact, no one, you wear that gun and badge long enough. That's not even a thought in your head, right? Am I going to get hurt? Right? It's not. In fact, now they think more stuff like, once it's save other people, it's like, am I going to get sued? Right? I mean, it's your own injury and death is way down the line, right? That heroic ability to dissociate the body's natural desire to run away, right? Because that's exactly what we're designed to do, is save ourselves. But we ask you, and something about you, and something, we know, truth be told, that's a developmental skill, right? That probably came even before you went through the police academy, is this ability, again, to put your own safety aside. Yeah, that 95% of the time, or 97% of the time, or let's be honest, 99.9% of the time, right? That's that heroism. That's that thing. And I use that word, and every cop that's watched it, I'm no hero. And you're right, you're not. You're not. But you have this ability to go through the doors that other people either A, can't, or B, won't, right? Yeah, over here though, when it becomes the environment is one that's convinced you that it's hopeless, right? It's not your weakness, right? That's your muscles still flexing,
Mhm.
right? And the idea of your own personal safety isn't there. Yeah, I mean, you're not weak at all. You're still functioning, as this, you know, warrior that's willing to go through the door. It's just the door over here is, I don't want this hopelessness in you.
Yeah.
Right? You're not cracked. You're not broken. You know, it's just right now in the environment, and that view locked in time, that this is not going to end. You know, and this is why it's so interesting. It's so interesting. Off duty, man, they can be so dark, so locked up. They'll get in their couch and cannot move, right? Cannot move. In fact, cannot move so much so that they can't carry out this, right, ideation. And yet they'll still go in and cover their shift and walk through all the doors,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's not a weakness. Um it's very scary for those of us around it. It's scary, and that's the stigma. If you're feeling it, and I'll speak to the crowd, or wherever that may be out there. If you're experiencing this, and you're feeling, well, I'm going to be judged, and if I say this, because I've been there when people have said this, and other cops run from them like it's like they're diseased. That has nothing to do with judgment or feeling that you're weak. That's to be honest, because right, it gets really close to us, and as I said, right, we'll walk into a stranger's door all day long and ask them if they're in crisis. We have a
Mhm.
real hard time when it's somebody that's sitting with us. It's not judgment at all. It's actually that internalization of, right, oh man, I smell some of that same smoke. Does that mean I'm, right?
Mhm.
No, you're still that class with your own personal safety is something that you're able to sort of put away for the service of others, right? And so it makes it really difficult for us to sort of maintain or hold that space with somebody who is so close to us that wears the same uniform, right, engages in the same stuff. And if they're seeing it, it's tough for us to hold space. And then that person's perception can be, I'm getting judged. No, absolutely not, man. Right. And again, that's where the systems and agencies that support the conversation, right, that provide the good training, arm their peer teams, hopefully if they have them, can allow for that. And yeah, we're not judging you. It's scary. It's scary for all of us. And we hate that you're here in this spot. I mean, this too shall pass, right?
Yeah.
And there's times, and that's where suicide prevention work, when I sort of work clinically with peers and with others, is there's a lot of times that we say if you're working clinically with somebody, I mean, you don't work harder than them, right? I mean, I think we've talked at a rebooting the blue on stuff like motivational interviewing, those sorts of things. And suicide prevention is one of those few times, especially with first responders, where I'll flat out say, man, yeah, I know you can't stand up. Here's my shoulder. I will literally pick you up and carry you.
Mhm.
Right? I will literally pick you. I will bridge this gap, right? Yeah, I will work harder than you, right, on this because I know what it's like to be locked up in that and not be able to move. And yeah, and that's where the work is. And again, that's that whole like referral, persuade, refer portion of the QPR, right?
Mhm.
Is I'll pack you to it if I have to, if that's what you need, and I'm here for it, right? And again, systems need to support that.
Yeah.
And amazingly, so proud of Oregon. I'm so proud of Oregon because the agencies that I do work with, really, when it comes down to brass tacks, they they will step up. I've seen them say, "Hey, we'll give this officer the day off to help, this other." I mean, I've seen it. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, part of a lot of the work that we do and make with the agencies that we support is just working to break down that stigma around mental health in general. And also, promoting and normalizing help seeking behaviors because, you mentioned like they're law enforcement are first through the door, right? But not necessarily the first to ever ask for help. Especially around like what feels like very scary and kind of vulnerable topics to say like I'm experiencing this thing. And so having those systems in place with people who are trained, question, persuade, refer, the QPR training, the assist, access to culturally responsive therapists like you, like Steve Bradley, like others that are in the region, is so vital. So then they can make that handoff to someone and carry them there if they have to. So I wanted to also talk about, because we're talking about suicidal ideation, and I think even just can we kind of define it for folks that we've talked about what it looks like systems wise, why it might be challenging to talk about for the individual who's experiencing it, for their colleagues. What actually is like suicidal ideation?
suicidal ideation, and there's different levels, but just ideation is. Have you ever thought what it would be like if you weren't here?
Mm-hmm.
And suicide portion is technically that it was by your own or intention or
Mm-hmm.
action.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, now, and again, that the numbers show that almost everybody's had that thought if you lived on this planet. And and now of course, no, I've never. Yeah, yeah. There's, and some of that comes into, they're starting to really nuance this with like death ideation, like just the idea of, well, what would it be like if I was here? Who would speak at my funeral? Those sorts of things. But the suicidal ideation is, by my own intention or some action on my part. Again, a lot have had that, and obviously it shows that law enforcement has that quite a bit if we're seeing these higher rates of action completion, because then there's that next step. There's the ideation, which
Mhm.
again, a lot of people have. And I say this in session because I want, under the confidentiality and privilege stuff, I want them to know that, right, this is a safe space to have the conversation and to say, that I've had this. And I'm not going to run and call 911. I've never had to, not
Mhm.
right. Yeah, and again, because it's very common. Now, then there is, you start to move up that scale where you start to really see real intent,
Mhm.
increase in intent. And that's actually more, we measure that a lot more when it comes to, or we see that a lot more when it comes to like plans.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've thought about it, and this is how we do it, and this is where I would do it. And this is, it starts that slow build, or not slow, that build up in detail is where we start to move from, like, and again, it's still ideation. They're not acting with, but that starts to go into, and again, even I've got it all the way up the scale, and yet never had to run a call 911. A lot of times that's where we start to work on the intervention stuff, and that's where, clinically we have the conversation about violations, or stepping outside of confidentiality, and usually it's that discussion of, who can we talk to outside of this, confidential agreement that might be able to make you safe, and that literally can be, and usually is, let's take the key to the gun safe and give it to somebody, while we start to do some work, or you just build in kind of one separate, or one layer, one veil between that person and the intent that they're sort of articulating.
Mhm.
And we see that, I think that's like 90% effective at those interventions.
Mhm.
So far, again, I've seen 100 times. But again, it's, so yeah, you have ideation at different levels, but again, just the whole idea of, you know, I've had the thoughts, very, very common, especially in law enforcement, especially like I said, if you walk through enough doors and see enough suicides, it's pretty common to think, oh, hey, and not even have the intent to do it, right? Yeah, if I did it, this is how I'd do it,
Yeah.
right? you know,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that helps a lot. And
it
then,
almost becomes like a professional conversation. I literally, I've sat in a patrol car with another guy, and it bulleted, no intent at all, but it's like, man, nah, this is how I would do it.
yeah.
It'd be all the pills, and I'd drift off sleepily, which you're like, that's not how it looks, right? You throw up all over your, it's horrible. Or no, I do it this way. And it's like, you're almost like this professional conversation. And you kill yourself. And it's like, wow, I look back now and go, geez, but
Yes. That's
it's,
really getting into that. I mean, like that's still it's there, right? But that's more common in the profession just because of what people are exposed to. But then it's from a clinical perspective, you're starting to look into intent, means, motive, and then as you see more clues, more signs, more symptoms, right? Then really looking at how to support that person. And so I think maybe that's I wonder too. I mean, there's doing research on this, and thinking back to some of the research studies. I think one of the hesitancies people have about in law enforcement have about even asking for help, whether it be mental health challenges in general or specific to suicidal ideation, is the concern that once I ask for help, I lose the badge.
right.
And so you've helped at least over 42 people working
Mhm.
at first responders. And so first responders or even law enforcement specific, like just help us understand, like just because someone is experiencing this at a point in time and asks for help doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to lose their job, right?
No, and that's why I think it's really important. What we're seeing is, it's really important to have access to those higher levels, like especially with confidential privilege of like a licensed provider. Below that would be your peer teams,
Mm-hmm.
because you know um, that allows for this disclosure to happen, and then sort of be weighed by trained people about, what is the next best step on this line. And what are the requirements? Um, and again, that's risk assessment.
Mhm.
Uh, so having access to that, yeah, I mean, it's still a medical treatment loan,
Mhm.
right? So, at least on my side, right, that's the conversations again until it comes up to where you have to weigh that risk of harm. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, but everything from, you've got inpatient, you've got outpatient individual sessions, all the way down the line, bringing in a medical provider, a PCP. I mean, it with depression, I mean, we have a phenomenal from the therapeutic perspective. We actually have phenomenal success in working with depression. If you do the right kinds of therapy, along with other interventions, including medication, stuff like that, right? We can help move somebody out of real acute depression really fast, really fast.
So it's not a doomsday prophecy, I think, is what I'm hearing, and hopefully what other people are hearing. Because suicidal ideation, thinking about killing yourself by suicide, like it's not a fun place to be, right? And until people can kind of, I think, ask for help. I mean, they're like sitting in the dark alone. And when you ask for help, maybe someone is like coming in and sitting down next to you with a candle, right? Like just helping to carry the light for you, and helping to support you to like eventually carry it with them to get out of that dark place so that they're not stuck there and alone. And hopefully folks are hearing, just because you ask for help doesn't mean you're going to lose your job. And it also doesn't mean, because you're a trained expert, other therapists are trained experts, peer support are trained in these things that when it comes to
I get nervous around the word expert, so
oh, sorry. Okay, fine. LPCs, licensed providers.
whatever. We're trained,
Fair
right?
enough. It's just like it's not as if someone says, I've been having these suicidal thoughts, the Chris doesn't go, okay, reporting, now you're an inpatient and you've lost your job. It's not that. It's this conversation around it. It's you really getting a good understanding of the risk and also knowing through your training, your licensure, everything that you do, how to support those people successfully so that they can get back to a healthy place to keep, doing the work that they're doing that is important to them, to keep being there for families, loved ones, pets. Because otherwise it's just kind of like you're just stuck there and it doesn't necessarily, magically get better on its own. I don't know. Am I
Well, and
wrong?
there's so many dials again that can be adjusted. I've had it, Claire, from somebody who just needed a little sleep, right? I mean, we say just a little. Now we know more and more and more research is showing just how important sleep is, right? To so many things, including, right? I mean, that space you might find yourself in where all you can think about is, I need to just kill myself, right? Get a little bit of sleep, right? If I can just get you off that shift enough time, we dial you in just a little bit of sleep, that will change. But I mean, so many different interventions that I've seen be successful. And to be honest, a lot of those that I've worked with that were at that space. And again, it's apocryphal, I don't know, but a lot of them are years later still work very effective, continue to work through it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, yeah, it's taking a little time off or, it's one of the reasons why I got certified as a ketamine assisted psychotherapist. I've seen what, again, there's all kinds of different and very effective interventions that do not include taking your gun and badge and breaking your saber and sending you away to, someplace, putting you in some box that says broken cops,
Mm-hmm.
right? No, in
Yeah.
fact, years on gone now, right? So many amazing careers of people that I'm just so honored that I can see them now, and some of them in the, doing great things across the state, actually the region. I work in multiple areas. Yeah, I mean, they're not broke. You're not broke. Yeah.
And if anybody takes anything away from our session together right now, I hope they hear that you're not broken. You can ask for help. There are resources. If someone is experiencing suicidal ideation, please reach out to the resources that we listed at the beginning that are listed in the description. Reach out to a peer support team member. Reach out to a therapist like Chris or Steve. Yeah, ask for help because help is out there. You don't have to lose your badge and gun when you ask for help. And it can, really there's supports that can make a difference. So, Chris, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom, knowledge, experience into our session again today. And yeah, I think a great
Well,
topic.
thanks for, I mean, even the topic, right? Thanks for Claire being brave enough to say, yeah, let's record this and let's talk about suicide. It's again, it's still, it's a heavy one, and I'm sure if somebody listens all the way through,
I know, right?
it can be heavy, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
As
Awesome.
someone who knows when you threw out that number 33, and in fact, probably knows way too many of those names, right? As somebody that sits here on the other side of this video, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And appreciate folks listening in. And yeah, if you want to be that person at your agency, either as a peer support team member or get involved in your peer support or ask, hey, can we get some training around this? I want to be prepared if I see signs and symptoms. I want to know what those signs are. I want to be able to ask that question of my colleagues. It could even be relevant in your off-duty life, right? Like lots of different people experience suicidal ideation and suicidal thoughts. So if you want that, I mean, reach out and ask for resources and training. It exists. Connect with your chaplain. And thanks so much for listening in, and we will see y'all on the next one. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.